Hello and welcome to InFocus. I am G. Sampath. Manipur has been under President's rule since February. But this week, a group of MLAs, about 10 of them, went and met the state's governor and informed them of their intention or of their wish to form a popular government. They have told him that they have the support of about 44 MLAs in an assembly that has about 60 seats. Now, at the same time, while this is going on the political front, the state is again in some kind of a turmoil. There have been widespread protests against what some people are saying is an incident where security forces allegedly tried to cover up the name of the state, Manipur, on a state transport bus. This seems to have caused a lot of offense, and protesters have been defacing signboards. They have been locking up central government offices, including that of the Chief Election Commission. And while all this has been going on one side, there is also a lot of question raised about the impact of President's rule in the state. So, what has been achieved so far in terms of restoring normalcy and peace? What is behind the latest round of civil unrest? And what are the real chances of a popular government being formed in the current scenario? To discuss all these questions, we have with us Abhinay Lakshman from the Hindu's Delhi Bureau, who has been tracking developments in the north for quite some time now for us. Abhinay, welcome to the pod.
Hi, Sampath.
So, Abhinay, to start with, I was just wanted to ask you about this mobilization to form a popular government. There are these MLAs from the NDA basically who have met the governor, and they're saying we have the support of 44 MLAs. And what is your understanding of what prompted this move? And is the central government likely to be sympathetic to their demand for a popular government?
My understanding is every time there is a strong reaction from the people in Imphal and the Valley regions against any action of the central government, which in this case, given the president's rule, is being perceived as a reaction to the central government running things. There is some form of an attempt. So even in this instance, when the MLAs did go to meet the governor, their justification for saying that we need a popular government is that is what the people want. We are people's representatives. People are pressuring us. Where is the state government? And hence we are bringing this proposal that we have the support and there should be a popular government, arguing that is what the people want and need in the state of Manipur. So I mean, the fact that the MLAs took this particular time of protests and anger of the people to go meet the governor is not surprising, because that seems to be reactionary to me, as far as my reading is concerned, that there is anger against how the state is being run as of this time, given that president's rule is in place. Because in the protests against the Gwaltabi bus incident, we
Can you
saw.
talk a little bit about this Gwaltabi incident? What exactly happened? There are some videos floating around.
Yeah. So what was happening is that the Shirui Lily festival, it's a flower, it's the state flower, and
It's an annual festival?
yeah, it's supposed to, it is held annually, but this is the first time it was being held after the conflict began in 2023, in May 2023. So it was part of an effort from the governor's administration to hold the festival in an attempt to signal that we can
It's a
proceed.
flower festival.
Yeah, so they celebrate the festival, the flower in bloom, and then there are other activities. There are concerts that happen, people come and perform. It's a big festival, multiple days that it happens. There's a big ground on which it happens. So this year it was happening in Ukhrul district, which is in the hills north of Imphal. And the district is largely dominated by the Naga community, the Naga tribal community. So this year, that's where the festival was being held. And as part of their efforts to cover the festival, the DIPR, the Directorate of Information and Public Relations in Manipur, the state's media arm, they were organizing a trip for journalists from Imphal, who were largely Meitei. So they were organizing this trip for journalists to go and cover this festival. There was an inaugural function for the festival that was scheduled on that day, on 20th May. So the bus left from Imphal, and on the Imphal-Ukhrul road, there is a Gwaltabi checkpost. It's a small village checkpost. So on the hill side of the road, which is on the eastern side of the road, there is a small, up in the hills, there's a small Kuki village called Gwaltabi Kuki. And on the eastern side of the road, there are further Meitei settlements and more valley regions. So at this check post, the description of the events on that day from people who were on the bus is that they were on the bus and the bus was stopped at the check post by joint security forces. Now, people on the bus say that people in that check post were both from central security forces and state police, and they had some words with the officials of the DIPR who were taking these journalists to the festival. And they were not clear. The journalists who were on the bus who spoke to me were not really clear what the conversation was about. One journalist said that the security forces said that we can't let you proceed on a Manipur state bus, so you must cover the word Manipur. But they didn't say why they wanted the name of the state to be covered, except for that, that has been the instruction that has been conveyed to them. That was just one journalist interpreting what the conversation was. So, videos emerged of the bus being stopped at the checkpost and security forces standing there. At one point, one video showed one DIPR official eventually climbing up and trying to use A4 white sheets to cover up the name Manipur on the bus. 15-20 minutes this bus was there, and then a few journalists, they decided that they were agitated because they were not being told why this cover up is being done. So they decided to leave that place and they returned to Imphal on their own. Now, after that, the news spread that there was an attempt to try and cover up the name of the state, and a whole bunch of civil society organizations in the valley, they mobilized, saying that the incident showed was a symbolic affront to the integrity of Manipur, which is what the Meitei community has been fighting for ever since the community conflict began. Because the Kuki's demand was for a separate administration, the counter to that from the Meitei community was that the territorial integrity of Manipur cannot be compromised. So, in the context of that, the covering up of the word Manipur on a Manipur state transport bus was perceived and read by the people, by these people, as an affront to the concept of what Manipur is, the territorial integrity of Manipur. So that is what kicked off the first wave of protests, and this was read as such by even members of the opposition party. We know that Lok Sabha MP from Inner Manipur, Mr. Bimal Akoijam, from Congress, he immediately reacted to it. He wrote a letter to the governor where he said that this was, given the context, this was an affront to the idea of Manipur. And he specifically mentioned that there was a lot of allegations, that popular allegations, that the central forces were hand in glove with the Kuki community, and that this incident would only give credence to those allegations.
Right. So now that in the aftermath of this incident, the chief secretary of the state has sort of promised a probe into this entire
Right,
incident,
yeah,
and
that came from the governor. So the governor issued a statement, issued a notification saying that there will be an investigation, that we are constituting an investigation into this. In the language, also, there was a problem because that said that the committee is being set up and it shall look into lapses, if any, and suggest measures to prevent recurrence of such a situation. So immediately after the issuance of order, there was also a sharp reaction from the journalists unions, who said that we are doing a pens down strike and we're not going to carry any news about the state government unless the second paragraph of the order is amended. They had a problem with the fact that it said if any lapses. So, and then it just escalated into street protests, and then there is this coordination committee on Manipur integrity that called for a civil disobedience movement, and then the protests escalated further and further.
so this bus was carrying journalists, and if the news of this spread and led to all these agitations and protests, so it has gone from journalists itself, right? The entire news.
Yeah, I mean, it was communicated from the journalists because the journalists were the ones who were at the scene. The bus was full of journalists, freelancers, people working in the local press, TV channels, YouTube channels, media people who were from Imphal being taken by the DIPR officials to cover the festival. So, obviously, when the news spread, it came from the people who were there, the eyewitnesses to that incident, which were journalists in this case.
And so this entire episode has unfolded while the state does not have a state government. It is under president's rule. What is the popular sentiment or the general sentiment from what you could gather with regard to president's rule? What do they feel about it? Do they actually? We know that politicians want to come to power, so that we will come back to that 44 MLAs wanting to form a government separately. But what is the general sentiment on the ground? Do they believe a state government would actually be better? I mean, across communities. I'm not talking about one community.
I mean, it is very difficult to make a make an assessment across communities what kind of government people in Manipur want, because ever since the conflict, loyalties have been split across community lines, and even within one community, within
Across community lines or along community lines?
along community lines, and even within each community there has been differing opinions. Even at the beginning of the conflict, when the Kukizo community felt safer in the presence of security provided by central security forces, the Meitei community felt safer in the presence of state government security forces. And that was unavoidable for the longest time in the conflict, because communities were alleging each of these security forces aiding the other communities, right? So on the Meitei community, they would accuse the central security forces of siding with the Kuki militants, and on the Kukizo side, it was very clear that from the beginning of the conflict, it was the state machinery that aided in their persecution and the violence that was perpetrated against them. So it is a very clear line in that regard, that the communities, at least the public facing organizations of these communities, which are the civil society organizations, have always maintained these allegations that central forces are with this one community and state forces are with this other community. But right now, and even when there was like, so as soon as the conflict began, there was significant ambiguity about whether Article 355 is in place, which confused people as to who is in charge in the state of Manipur. Is it the then Chief Minister N. Biren Singh and the state machinery that he controls, or is it the center by way of Article 355 which is in control? And that ambiguity was somewhat laid to rest with the creation of the Unified Command Center, where the Chief Secretary and the Security Advisor were on top. And now we can say that at least the anger in the valley, the protests, the civil disobedience movements, have called for strong reactions against the people who were leading this unified command center. For instance, the security advisor, the chief secretary, and the director general of police. So it is very difficult to say what people as a whole in Manipur want, because different people, different communities want different things. The Kukizo community is very clear that they want the separate administration, and that movement is still going on. And the Meitei community is very clear that the only way to oppose that is to swear by the territorial integrity of the state, which they have argued has had a long history, pre-India history
So
of.
how does the union government, the home ministry, for instance, I mean, which has been talking about initiating a peace process and dialogue and so on, these are two completely contradictory positions. I mean, want a separate administrative setup. The Kukis or communities and the Meiteis want the integrity of the state and administrative regime to be sort of kept intact. So these are, it seems like a stalemate kind of a situation.
Oh, it is. It is very much a stalemate, and I don't think any community disagrees that it is a stalemate, because after the latest round of meetings that this one Meitei civil society organization had with the Federation of Civil Society Organization, which is also a banding of several other civil society groups, they had a meeting with the officials of Ministry of Home Affairs this week. And after the meeting, the one of the first things they said when they were talking to the press was that we have conveyed to the MHA that we are in a stalemate. There seems to be no going ahead from here, or we want to engage with the other community. We know that it is going to take time, but it would be useless to assume or presume that it is nothing but a stalemate. It is a stalemate very clearly, and the only way forward is to take time and have as many talks as possible, and try to get the groups on the table to the extent that it is possible.
So as far as resolving the big picture conflict is concerned, I mean, as you've said, there is clearly a stalemate situation. But what about the other concerns which were supposed to be sort of addressed during the president's rule? Things such as the return of arms which were looted, surrendering those arms. That is one. Then a free mobility along the highways, between the regions which are populated by different communities. The mobility of the highways is supposed to have been started, I think, from March 8th, according to the Home Minister, but I don't know what the status is. And thirdly, the resettlement of people who are displaced by the violence. So, on these three issues, for instance, what is the status? What do we know
So,
of the things?
yeah, I mean, clearly, like, so since the president's rule came into being, the governor Ajay Kumar Bhalla, he has issued multiple directives, notifications, requesting people, whoever is carrying weapons, to return them. and has been extending the deadline, saying that if you do return the weapons within this deadline, we will make sure that there is no action, there's no legal repercussion for you. So there was a significant response to that, because in the first few weeks of those notifications coming, a lot of people did surrender weapons, and a lot of statements were issued saying that we are surrendering weapons. Even from both the communities, there was a significant response to it, because for the first time we saw the Kukizo community also responding to it and saying that they appreciate this move from the governor. The last time an appeal was made for voluntary returning of weapons, it had come from independent MLAs, and that did not see any kind of a response, so to speak, because there were some photos that we saw of MLAs setting up, collection boxes in public spaces, asking people to return weapons, but I didn't see anything. But after the governor's call, some weapons were released and returned. But what remains concerning, and what is concerning even MLAs at this point, is that half of the weapons still remain to be returned, and they are still with the public, and there is no certainty about how many more weapons have come into the hands of the civilians from other sources apart from what was looted in the first few weeks of the conflict beginning. That is one thing. The weapons,
So half of the weapons are still sort
there
of
are
at
still, like,
large.
yeah, at
At least like
large.
half would mean like how many? Like
So we had a count of about 6,000 weapons that were looted in the first few weeks of the conflict. So the latest estimate suggests that about 3,000 are still at large, somewhere, I think plus minus 100 or something like that. So, like, those weapons are still very concerning because they're still in the hands of civilians, as far as anyone can say. So the weapon situation, yes, there was a response, but still a large number of weapons remain in civilian hands in the
what do
state.
you mean civilians? I mean, aren't there also these paramilitary kind of outfits which are sort of
I mean, for
floating around?
lack of, like, see, for instance, if you're referring to certain groups like Arambai Tengul, there is no notification declaring them as a militant group, right? We know that they are an armed group. They operate in certain structured ways, creating units for themselves, having jurisdiction for those units. But sure, you can say they are at the end of the day civilian, like, in the sense that once they are prosecuted for any offenses that they might have carried out, they will be taken as civilians who will be prosecuted for those offenses. In that sense, is what I mean, civilians. But these are armed civilians who have coalesced into these outfits at the end of the day. So that is there. And as far as the free movement is concerned, there was a significant effort. You see, on March 1, there was a security meeting at which it was very widely reported. In fact, there was a statement from the government which said that Home Minister Amit Shah has directed for free movement along the highways to begin from March 8 onwards. And on March 8, there was a lot of. So, just in the build up to March 8, the Kukizo groups had issued opposition statements saying that you can't ensure free movement by force, and that will lead to some kind of a conflict, and, like, we shouldn't be held responsible for it. On March 8, there was another, this free Federation of Civil Society Organizations had also said that we will heed the Home Minister's call and march towards the hills, to make sure that the free movement is ensured. But at the end of the day, the state administration tried to send some buses across in an attempt to follow that instruction, to follow the free movement instruction. But what ended up ensuing was, like, there were clashes with Kukizo people and Central Armed Police Forces. At least one person was killed, had died in the clashes, and 40-50 people were injured as a result of that. And after that, attempts have reduced to try and ensure the free movement by force. And at the latest meeting with the Métis representatives, the Métis representatives have told us that the MHA has been very clear that the government does not want to use excessive force to ensure the free movement direction. And they have also communicated that resettlement of people is something that cannot be put on the table as of right now, because resettlement and free movement of on the highways are issues that are going to take time, things that will not be solved in a few months or weeks. So if we go by the face value of that message, we can't expect free movement or resettlement in the next few months. That's not something that should be reasonably expected by either community, is what the government has communicated to them.
Right. So on all the three questions, I mean, it's a big no. So have the arms been surrendered? No. Half of them are still at large. Is there free movement? No. And resettlement? No. Okay, so let's move on from this. So this entire conflict began under a certain politician who was in charge back then, which is Mr. N. Biren Singh.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, is he still very much active in this political mobilization to form a popular government? Is he one of the 44 MLAs? Does he still enjoy popular support? What is his role right now?
As far as his role right now, he has been in the shadows, so to speak. Based on the reports we've seen of the 44 MLAs, firstly, the 44 MLAs is a contentious issue in the sense that sure they have claimed the support of 44 MLAs.
But I think the signatures were less
Yeah, so there
number.
were signatures of 22 MLAs, and the number of MLAs that met with the governor was 10. So it remains to be seen whether the claim of having support of 44 MLAs, to what extent that will be realized, that support actually when it comes to the time of forming the government. MLAs who met with the governor yesterday were very clear that Mr. Biren Singh's presence or his leadership in the formation of any new government would not be acceptable to any community or to the legislative members in any way, because number one, a large part of the Kokizo's demand was for his removal as CM, and the president's rule now exists because he stepped down. But what is interesting is that a day before these MLAs went to the governor yesterday, Mr. Biren Singh had written a letter to the governor, but that was largely about a sense of like claiming vindication. He was making points about illegal immigration, the territorial integrity of Manipur, points that he has been using to throughout the conflict. Like, so it was just like a long, several pages letter outlining the history, how immigration is coming into Manipur, and how it is very important to stop that illegal immigration. But as far as the MLAs that met the governor and tried to form a government, it seems unlikely that Biren Singh would have any kind of a leadership position in any new government that comes. But if they are claiming the support of 44 MLAs, Biren Singh must be one of them, because the other MLAs who they are not including in the 44 are the 10 Kokizo MLAs and the 5 Congress MLAs. So, like, Biren Singh, by calculation, has to be among the 44, like, in order for the government to come through, if they are claiming 44 MLAs
Right.
support.
And do we know if these 44 MLAs are from one particular community?
No, they are spread across communities. Largely, they are from the Meitei community, but we have Naga MLAs in that group. We have Meitei Pangal MLAs in that group. So it would be incorrect to say all 44 are Meitei for sure. Like,
Right. One last question, Abhinay, before we wrap this up. So, I mean, what exactly is the security arrangement in the state right now? I mean, is it is there any particular agency in charge? Would someone traveling to the state from outside would they feel safe? I'm just trying to understand with 3 4 months of president's rule, how has the security situation changed, if at all, from what it was?
see, even now when we are seeing protests and people react to how the security is held, so where the buffer zones are very much intact. The buffer zones which separate the Kuki community from the Meitei community, the Kukizo community.
How big is a buffer zone?
The buffer zone. So the only way to visualize Manipur is with Imphal Valley region being in the center of the state, which is surrounded by hills, right? So in different parts of, and the valleys have like arms just stretching into the hills. So most of the Kukizo communities, they live in the hill areas. In multiple districts, there's Churachandpur, More, Tengnopal. So wherever there is a confluence of foothills along the Imphal Valley, there are buffer zones. So they separate like basically the hills from the valley in whichever geographical area that respective
So these
geographical
buffer
area.
zones are sort of manned or sort of
They are
monitored
manned,
by
yeah.
state or central.
So it's all a joint security force operation. That has been the case for the longest time. Even the main buffer zone between the Imphal Valley region and Churachandpur, which is where some of the main Kukizo communities is civil society organizations operate from. So the last time that I was in the state was when there was a state government. So even at that time, there were at least 7 layers of checkposts to cross into Churachandpur from
Seven
the,
late.
so like before Chulachandpur, that would be Bishnupur district. So that was the last Meitei settlement. and then you go into the hills. So before you cross into the hills, there would be a seven-layered check post, which began with Manipur police at that time on the Bishnupur side, and ended with a check post of Cookies or civil society organization, which is ITLF. In between, there would be checkposts manned by the Assam Rifles, the BSF, the CRPF, all multiple security agencies that would have multiple checkposts checking and exiting vehicles that are
So
coming
there'll
in.
be huge traffic jams, I'm
No,
assuming.
people are not. It's you are assuming that people are taking a chance to go into those areas. So people who know that they will not be safe there, they're not going to traverse. That's the whole situation there. There will be no mateys who will be wanting or lining up to cross the checkpost to go into Churachandpur, for instance, and neither are people from Churachandpur districts lining up to go into Imphal. They have figured out alternate arrangements. A
So
lot of
who sort of traverses these checkposts? Are they like those who vendors and suppliers, or
vendors, yeah. So mostly it'll be vendors. Even when you are in Manipur, it is a struggle to find cab drivers who will take you across, because very few people are considered neutral by both communities, and the most commonly found such people are Meitei Pangals. They are Muslim Meitei people, originally ethnically Meitei, who had over generations converted to Islam, and they have these small settlements in between Meiteis and Kukizo peoples, and they are somewhat considered neutrals, and they are the ones who are allowed by both communities to traverse across both territories. So those buffer zones still exists, and those buffer zones continue to be a point of contention for a large number of people in the valley region, because that signifies that they are not allowed to leave the valley, that they are not safe if they leave the valley. So that is something that still they believe that as long as the buffer zones exist, the territorial integrity of the state will be under threat, or will be questioned, because there is a physical separation that has been enforced for so long. And as far as the security apparatus on a whole, it's still being dealt. The security advisor is still there, the chief secretary is there, and the DGP, and the governor is controlling the administration right now because it's president's rule. So that is the kind of apparatus that's still holding in the state somehow.
right? I just want to get a sense of what quote unquote normal life is as of now today. Say in Imphal, like how do people get from one place to another? Can you book an Uber or something? Like what happens? Like, I'm sorry.
In my, yeah, I mean,
Like when you were there, how did
yeah,
you
yeah.
get from A to B?
I mean, we had to get vehicles like booked for the day. Like, we had to call either the hotel receptionist, or over multiple trips, we had found people who ran car services that helped us travel across the state. But mostly what we saw was people using their own vehicles, scooties, bikes, cars to the extent possible. And yeah, public transport, there will be shared public transport, a lot of them autos, auto rickshaws in the main city for sure, but less and less to go across districts from, I mean, obviously across districts of these communities. But yeah, I mean, there are buses that you can take to go into non-conflict affected areas, for instance, like but apart from that, people are mostly having to use their own vehicles. I don't think I've ever opened an Uber or an Ola app in Manipur in the last 2 years, so it's very difficult for me to say that right now, whether like regular people are able to just book a cab and go. But yeah, I mean, it's as people are, since they are already sequestered in their respective areas, they are using whatever vehicles they can to transport, like whether it is their own vehicles or these shared transportation. There'll be like large auto rickshaws where there'll be 10 people who will be taken one particular distance on a designated route.
Right. I mean, I was half serious, but at the end of the day, I mean, Imphal is the capital of a state,
Yes.
and it's very clearly, one can see that the economy, the basic economy, even things like transportation, commuting, has been severely impacted, and for quite some time, which is not good news at all for the people who are sort of there. Anyway, so that's all I have for you, Abhinay, in this episode of In Focus. It's a grim situation. Hopefully, things will improve, and hopefully, we will come back and do another episode as the developing stories unfold. Thank you so much.